The police raid that sparked the violent summer of 1967 placed a spotlight on the racial tension between law enforcement and the African American community. So, 50 years later, have relations between police and residents improved? Here to answer that question is Detroit Police Chief James Craig. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
I actually want to start with your memory of 1967. You were here in the city of Detroit.
In the city of
a young man, a very young man, right?
10 years old.
Yeah, and not far. You didn't live far from.
Lived on Doris and Dexter in the 10th precinct. My dad was a police reserve working out of the 10th precinct. So I had a deep connection to this community.
Right, and 10 years later.
10 years later, I'm a Detroit police officer.
Right.
Very interesting.
Working at
the 10th precinct.
right. Full circle, right?
Full circle.
Yeah. So first, I want you to tell me what you remember your dad telling you about being a police officer in the city of Detroit in the 1960s, being a black police officer.
Well, he was a reserve officer
in the city.
And my dad served in the military, U.S. Army, as a military police officer. And once he got discharged, he wanted to be a police officer, but because of discrimination, couldn't. But he still wanted to give back. He still wanted to work in the police department in some capacity. So he was a city employee, but he was also a reserve officer. And so he told me the stories, him growing up as a young African-American man in this city, how it was like being approached by the Detroit police officer, which then was a majority white police department. I made up a mind at 10 years old, I didn't want anything to do with the Detroit Police Department.
Is that right?
Nothing to do.
Yeah, you held that true, right?
Well, I made 20 years old. I decided to join, and I guess I look back, my dad truly had an influence on me. But I think it was my welcome to the Detroit Police Department that will certainly, now that I have 40 years in this business, will stay with me for the rest of my career. And that was my welcome by a Detroit police officer. Senior officer, probably 25 years. And if you just think of the 10th precinct, 10 years after the civil unrest, many of the same officers that worked in the 10th precinct
were still there.
They were still there. So my partner looked at me, and I'll never forget, he just said, I don't want you here. You do one thing, just be black, don't talk to me, you're not going to drive this police car, and don't touch the radio. And I never forget.
This is in the late 1970s.
This is 77. I started June 16th, 1977. And so I thought, this is certainly not what I want to do. And I remember talking to my dad about it. He said, well, you don't have much of a choice. Because if you want to be about change, you have to become part of that change effort. But I knew as a police officer, I could have only so much change. So I knew early in my career, to have wholesale change, I needed to run the police department. And I knew it then. And so I'm glad I look back now 40 years, best decision that I made, even though I left the city of Detroit to pursue the career in another city, Los Angeles. But I'm glad I joined because I can tell you, and the question is, has there been change? Well, I can tell you.
I mean, things get worse for a while after the rebellion. The police department takes revenge, essentially, on the African-American community with the stress unit that was created.
Stress was just ended. I started in 77. I had a sergeant who had just been transferred. Stress was abolished under Coleman Young. So a lot of the vestiges of what went on. You're talking about a police culture. You cannot change a culture in 10 years. It just doesn't happen. Yes, we had a black mayor. Yes, we had a black police chief by then. But to be candid, the culture existed. Now,
the same culture.
Very close. And then when you fast forward, after I left Detroit, we have other instances of major cases that took place that led us into a federal oversight. For a very long time. I mean, one of the longest running in the country.
So talk about what you've been able to accomplish. I mean, almost anyone you ask in the city will say things are better between the police and the community. Now, they're not perfect. We still have issues, things come up, incidents happen. But what are the things that made that change possible under your leadership?
Trust and engagement. And when I talk about engagement, you hear a lot of police departments, police chiefs talk about community policing. But what defines community policing? It's really a partnership. Police departments do it wrong when they go into communities and dictate, this is how we're going to police your community. That never works. That's the problem. But if you go back in time, even in the late 70s, Detroit was really a model for community policing. We had many stations. So there was a change then, but something happened because, one, there was very little investment in Detroit Police Department.
Right.
Would it surprise you to know that we were the third highest paid police department at one time in this country?
And now
we don't even match that of our suburban neighbors.
Right.
Something's inherently wrong. 4 years ago when I started, this is what we know. Response times over an hour. Clearance rates to homicide, embarrassingly low, 11%.
Right.
A community that had lost total confidence in the police department. The issues were there. And so now we look back just 4 years and we see that we have response times that replicate that of other major cities. We have a clearance rate that's above the national average. We have community policing, or neighborhood policing as I like to refer to it, where we have neighborhood police officers in the neighborhood on the ground working closely with the community. That's the difference, and it's based out of trust. You have no trust, you have no relationship. That is clearly the bottom line.
Yeah. We've only got a few minutes left, but we still have this awful crime problem in the city. It's a very violent place. It's a very dangerous place if you live in certain neighborhoods. How much of the trust that you have from the citizens depends on you making the crime picture look a lot better?
We can't do it alone. It's not enough of us. You know, the community has to be engaged. They have to be involved. And while I constantly talk about the fact that we are trending downward, we've seen the lowest homicide numbers that we've seen in 45 years. Still not enough.
Sure. As
you point out, per capita crime is still too high. But we can't do it alone. There are other issues, socioeconomic issues. We got this issue called the mentally ill not being treated.
Right, sure.
We don't talk about those things. We talk about the education system. That has a direct impact. So when we look at our police officers, do we honestly believe that they are the sole solvers? We got something called courts. Yeah. We got prosecutors.
Sure.
So we have to be in this as one.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. Quickly, 50 years forward, what's the ideal situation between police and the community in Detroit?
Well, you know, I got to tell you, I'm a little biased. I think we've come a long way. I'm very proud of the work that our men and women do each and every day. You know, we've had the unfortunate distinction that 10 of our officers have been shot or killed in the last 7 months. But despite that, our officers, generally speaking, do not overreact or underreact to situations. That says a lot when you talk about policing in a city where they know it's violent,
right, but
they still want to come back to work and serve this city with distinction and honor, and they do it each and every day.
Yeah, well, happy to have you here.
Thank you.
Congratulations on all the work.
Okay, appreciate it.